You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission.
Welcome to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis. I'm Jonathan Sheely. We are joined today by Mr. Sam Brock, Executive Director at Ironwood Christian Camp. Sam and his wife Cindy live in Newberry Springs, California, and have 4 adult children. His first job was at age 8 when he made snow cones and learned the necessity of customer service, and that skimpy is never a good business model.
Never a good business model.
A major hobby of Sam's is board games. Sam and his son Bodie run a YouTube channel called The Game Garage, where they review and critique games. His favorite sport team is the San Diego Chargers, but he will cheer for whoever's in the playoffs. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We are looking forward to this conversation. I have been for a long time, and you are a great friend to Maranatha, and it's just an honor for our students to be able to work and serve at Ironwood. We have a bunch of alumni that are serving out there, including yourself.
Yeah.
And as a graduate student, you were the student activities director, and
right.
I can't think of a more perfect job for a camp guy than student activities.
Yeah, keep all the students busy while they're not in class.
Well,
so
sometimes when they are. How many events on campus at that, in that year that you served in that role, did you keep track?
On that year we did 60 events in 32 weeks.
Whoa!
So it was a pile. Yeah. And we did a whole bunch of them that were very, very unique.
I would guess it's about that many now still. That's pretty amazing. And honestly, you have so many different diverse interests in venues and styles. You've got everything from a highbrow harp recital I've been to, harp recitals on campus, to the big ball volleyball, and you should see some of the big toys they have now. They've got a ball cage, and Mr. Board, I've seen him in it, roll down the hill. Just strap him in and roll him down the hill. You guys have knocker balls at the big inflatable fight each other?
Zorbs.
You call it Zorb in California?
Yeah.
That figures.
Different name for it. Yeah. Different lingo.
We're a little warmer, so that cooks you. It's like a greenhouse sitting inside.
Maybe not.
But the belly bumpers.
You don't want to be the second guy in the ball. Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
Sounds awesome. Well, this is a podcast that is devoted to talking to leaders who are about something in life, and the question that we always hit people with is, what is your mission in life? And you have that pretty well defined. In fact, I read it to the students this morning as you presented in the General Assembly, and I wonder how you articulate that.
It's an interesting piece because I'm not normally asked what my mission is. It's something that I've had, but I don't normally talk about it much, except for when I'm with college students. They're trying to figure out what they're doing. I'm like, well, what's your mission? And they kind of stare at you like, I don't know, get through school. It's kind of a
bad mission at this point.
It's whatever is the next year or two, but it doesn't go beyond that. And so I didn't have a mission in my early 20s. I was age 28, something like that. I was on I was at another camp, and we were doing that, all-nighter at the truck stop, solve the world's problems kind of. I mean, they should have recorded some of those conversations, because then
probably best that they didn't all get recorded,
right? But we talked about everything. But while I was sitting there, I'm like, I just don't know what to do next. Like the ministry was growing. We definitely had some different things we could have done. And he slid a piece of paper across the table, and he said, I want you to read this. And so it's the piece of paper that I brought to you guys here. So I'm going to read it. I know this is a podcast and all that sort of stuff, but I'm going to read it. And I want you to, as I'm reading it, what is one phrase that just kind of hits you? That's like, oh man, that's really hits me good. So I'm reading it, you, the audience listening in. Here we go. We are obliged at a given moment to accept necessary sacrifices. It is a painful thing to say to oneself, by choosing one road, I am turning my back on 1,000 others. Everything is interesting. Everything might be useful. Everything attracts and charms a noble mind. But death is before us. Mind and matter make their demands. Willy-nilly we must submit and rest content as to the things that time and wisdom deny us, with a glance of sympathy, which is another act of homage to the truth. Do not be ashamed to not to know what you could only know at the cost of scattering your attention. Be humble about it, yes, for it shows our limitations. But to accept our limitations is part of a virtue and gives us a great dignity, that of the man who lives according to his law and plays his part. We are not much, but we are part of a whole, and we have the honor of being a part. What we do not do, we do all the same. God does it, our brethren do it, and we are with them in the unity of love. Therefore, do not imagine you can do everything. Measure yourself. Measure your task. After some experiments, make up your mind, though without rigidity, to accept your limits. Preserve by reading, and if necessary, by a certain amount of writing, the advantage of your early studies, your contact with wide fields of knowledge. But for the main part of your time and strength, concentrate. The half-informed man is not the man who knows only the half of things, but the man who only half knows things. Know what you have resolved to know. Cast a glance at the rest. Leave to God, who will look after it, what does not belong to our proper vocation. Do not be a deserter from yourself through wanting to substitute yourself for all others. Okay, what phrase hits you?
Everything is interesting, and everything might be useful.
Yeah, and I think in our lives, we kind of sit there and we're like, oh, man, I should devote time to this. Oh, I need to do this. And before you know it, you're so spread in everything that you want to do. You're like, oh, man, but it's interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Lots of things hit me. But in the first paragraph, by choosing one road, I am turning my back on 1,000 others. And how many times that paralyzes us into choosing nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because we would have to say no to something.
Yep. Yeah. And I think this is where a mission really comes into being helpful, because it actually makes a choice. I've known people for years who just seem to be option collectors. Well, what are you doing? Well, I could do this, and I'm thinking about this, and this is a really good option. And before you know it, they have so many things, and you're like, well, what have you done? Well, but I'm planning, you know, and they've got all these.
Keeping my options open.
Exactly. And at some point, you just have to sit there and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Like this is what it's going to be.
I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about that, the fear of failure, that still, even in failure, it's progress.
Correct.
Because now you've learned something that didn't work, or a better way, and you can improve and iterate and try again, but at least you're not where you were. That's failure. Staying where you are is failure. At least advancing, even if you're advancing in a zigzag fashion, you're still, and if you make enough of those adjustments and enough of those failures and recorrections, eventually a trajectory starts to emerge in life.
Right. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. I think when you're trying to do a mission, if you do it too early, you don't have any of those failures under your belt. You don't have anything kind of figured out. But if you do it too late, you don't have the time to concentrate. You don't have the time to like go after what you were going to do. So the one that hit me when I was going through it was that last statement: do not be a deserter from yourself through wanting to substitute yourself for all others. And I was kind of like, oh man, my problem was I was trying to do a little bit of everything for everybody.
Yep.
And it wasn't working. Like I had now, because what happens in your early 20s is responsibility starts coming your way. You start doing a pretty good job with it, and now more responsibility comes your way. Somebody finds a competent person, they keep giving them more.
Yeah, the curse of competence.
Right. And then at some point you have to just say, no, I'm not. This is what I'm here for, and that's what your mission does for you. So,
Well, he says, concentrate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So that's focus. So it's the difference between a shotgun and a rifle, right? But for a lot of people, and myself included, when you have multiple interests and talents and diversity of ability, the world is at your feet. And that's paralyzing in some ways. But okay, I could do anything. I could be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, or boy, those are really different things. You won't be any of those things unless you pursue one of those things.
Correct.
And so it's an issue of focus, but that focus also equals sacrifice. And that's where our pride comes in to say, hey, buddy, you're limited. And that's what I'm seeing all throughout this too, is that, be humble about it. It shows your limitations.
Yeah, it's like you're just, okay, this is true. I can't do everything. I can't be Superman. but you're also like, if I say yes to one, I'm saying no to 1,000 others. That is such a difficult thing. So I think that's where now the mission becomes so important, is that we figure out, okay, what is that thing that I'm going to do? What is there that what is going to be that mission? So
Where'd you get this? Did you write this?
I didn't write it. Oh. I guess it's from the book, The Intellectual Life, The Field of Work. I know it's written by A.G. I don't even know how to say that.
Sertalanges.
You just
that's
say
it
the guy.
confidently.
Okay.
You remember him well.
Sertalangi. He's a 13th century monk. That's where willy-nilly comes from.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, that was colloquial language of the day. But no, a friend just handed it to me, and it really made me think. Yeah. And so I went back home, and we were doing a Men with a Mission retreat. And we had about 20 pages, and we were helping men write their mission statement. And this is what I'd love to. I'll see if I can get a link to you guys so that you can just walk through this mission statement. So mine has not changed since I wrote it, and I really enjoyed the process. Probably took me about 8 hours to work on the mission statement, but I'm going to walk through the process real quick. It starts off with, things on your bucket list. What are you wanting to do? What's your life list of ministry? What's your life list of adventure? What's your life list of things you want to own? And it's all this big stuff that you're just kind of like, oh, I'd like to do this, and this would be fun, and what about this? And it starts narrowing it down. You're probably spending 3 or 4 hours just writing down list of kind of who you are, what you like, what's going on. You start another hour or so about what you know about God, and you write that down. Then it starts narrowing it down to, kind of what are 7 words that you want to describe your life? What are some of the things that have happened in your life that make your life unique in a sense that maybe the way God has worked or what he's done in your life? And so it just works you through. It's about 20 pages, and you just kind of work through a little workbook. And we wrote it up for our men's retreat, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I took 2 half days, did 4 hours, and then 4 hours. And, it works you through writing a rough draft and then writing a final draft. And I finished that process, and I looked at my note, and I realized, oh, this doesn't have camp in it. Like, you wrote this mission statement, and my whole life ministry working at camp is not even mentioned. But that's because it actually transcends the career choice. Mm-hmm. The mission lives in a bigger space than all the various roles that I have in my life. But that mission now, all those roles help me accomplish that mission. Like
those can be components, and they may change over time.
Yes, yeah, and I don't know how God's going to lead. I know where he's put me right now, but I don't know the future. I don't know what that all looks like. I do know how he's made me. So it was kind of a weird thing to be like, okay, I know what makes God happy, and I know how he's made me. So just like I have a garage at home, I walk into the garage. If something's broke, the drain is broke, I know what tool. I need a tool that grips pipe. I don't need a hammer. Now, I might want to take a hammer to the sink, but I need the tool that is the right tool. It's got the right characteristics, the right benefits to that tool. And I believe that we're working in God's ultimate plan. He makes all of us a little bit differently, and I just need to figure out how he's made me that would make him happy with my life.
But your process put the development of the mission first, and then you allow the roles to kind of develop through time and throughout your life. Those are going to change.
Yes, and this goes back to priority in life, and this might be a bit controversial, but somebody's like, oh, family first, or whatever. I believe I say yes to God. He's in the center. So just imagine you've got God here in the center. He's who I say yes to. And then I say yes to him in all the various roles I have in my community, in my family, in my work, in my church. And there's no such thing as 1, 2, 3. I don't see it in Scripture. I see yes to God. There's nobody that I'm going to be. He's who I'm going to be obedient to. And what that does is that means as I say yes to God, And now I have to say yes and no to everything else. So there's nothing worse than, when my girls were little and you walk out the door like, Dad, play with us. And I'm like, I would like to, but I need to go to work. No, Dad, play, and I'm like, no, I've got to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's no to home. But then there are times that I have to say no to work. Sometimes I have to say no to church, but I'm saying no, not because of what I feel like, but because I'm trying to be obedient to God in all the roles that he's given me. So my mission is kind of saying, how do I personally, so if I'm wrapped right around God here, how do I personally accomplish being obedient to him?
But those roles compete sometimes. And you've
Always
alluded
compete.
to the pressure of, we say, well, family is first. Somebody says, okay, well, my family needs to be first, then my ministry, well, that doesn't mean that every single day I ignore this because that's there. They're always in tension, and it's very difficult on any given day to know where you're at with the balance of that.
Right. I think the balance is one that you're constantly readjusting to. You never get on that balance and stay there for more than a moment, and I think that process is figuring out, okay, what did God tell me? How am I obedient to my relationship with my wife? How am I obedient in my relationship with my kids? Like sometimes we set our expectations out there as to what that looks like, but I've got to go back to what God said. Here's how I do it. So for Cindy and I, when we make adjustments to my schedule, it's a question of how am I being disobedient to God? What is being missed that God wants me to do? And I need to figure out how to get that thing back in the right balance.
Yeah, that's where a partner, an external observer, is very helpful. They see it far before, or maybe feel it far sooner than we do individually.
Yeah,
and I think especially men tend to be more goal-oriented, mission-oriented in that way.
Well, here's the problem. All people have a tendency to be single-tracked.
Okay.
So one track is just working on the family. One track is just working on the church. One track is just working at work, And so what we have to do, though, is my single track is God, and he's given me all these different ways to show obedience. But any one of those areas can actually become my God. Mm-hmm. So something that's really good can suddenly be the thing I'm always saying yes to. So if I'm always saying yes to work, and I never say no to work, work is my new God. God is my new role in my life. It's something I'm saying yes and no to now. And man, that's a recipe for disaster in a hurry, because God is a jealous God. He wants that spot right there in the middle. And so it can be tough.
And that's where I think the everything might be useful statement kind of grabbed me, where there's so many tensions between very good things to be doing, whether that is the things outside of home, work, ministry. The rest of them, those are good options. But when those good options become the only option, you're in a bad backward situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose it's possible that, likely, or maybe certainty, that the roles themselves will change over time. And we've talked about that. I suppose it's also possible that you could fail, or let's say be less than successful in a given role, but still be successful in the mission, the overall mission, if we define it that way. That there might be things that, say, a work failure actually redounds to the glory of God and accomplishes what God wanted to see happen. If my single focus is just success at work in that particular role, say a secular job or whatever, but I have to be unethical to do it, then I'm going to fail in my mission even though I've succeeded in my role. So I think it's a difference in defining success more closely with my governing mission, my overall mission in life, rather than with each individual task. But these tasks are more tangible. And if we're honest, we probably define success more in the more tangible, objective areas and tasks of life than we do in the more ethereal mission of life.
Well, and then so that comes back to the good fight of faith, where I have to define my life not by the things that I can see. So I'm living my life completely based on the fact that there is a heaven, that there is a hell. Those are real places. I'm living my life completely that there is a God. I've never shook his hand. You know what I mean? I've talked with him, but he doesn't talk back to me. He's written me a letter. He's written me the Bible, but it really feels like I'm living life for something that I can't actually point to. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it's much easier just to live for what I can see, what I can hold, what is right there.
I've always been fascinated by the fact that even in living by faith, or maybe especially in living by faith, there's still an economy to that. We're told to lay up treasures in heaven, and that's a statement that says, hey, you should be motivated by this. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what the Lord is telling us. And so we are still motivated by accomplishments. It's just that they're defined differently, and they're time deferred in eternity.
And it's kind of odd because a choice is a value proposition. Like a choice has value on both sides. So I'm making this is it worth it kind of decision. And I think that this race of life is just a long-term choice to make decisions for a future that I don't get to enjoy until I die. It's kind of
that's why they call it faith, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're doing this on faith.
So if I think that this life here on earth is the end all, I will not make the right choices. So I've got to live with that ethereal thing that we're talking about being as if it's reality. Mm-hmm. Like I've got to live like that is just real. And I don't think we live like heaven is real. Like it's so out there, so Sunday school, mm-hmm. that I just don't live like it's.
You talked about a book you read recently that was kind of a fiction narrative, but sort of taking place in the end times. And I've read a lot of those kinds of books, as well as nonfiction, just studies of what does the Bible say about heaven.
Yeah.
It's so different than the popular depictions, or even what we come up with in our head about, sitting on a cloud strumming a harp. I mean,
singing.
Honestly, it sounds boring. Okay, the way and it's going to be anything but boring.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I think if we had a little better tangible grasp of what the Bible does reveal to us about heaven, which it's less than satisfying. I mean, we want the
we wish
whole,
we had more.
Draw me a picture, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we ought to put our minds and our mental energy into imagining that. I think it might change the way we approach life.
Yeah, and in that book, The Seventh Age by Jason Montgomery, he basically does a thing where I've just got to trust somebody's word. Like if God showed me everything, like if he sent me the little depiction of this is your mansion, this 4-bedroom, 3-bath place could be yours. If I got that, then I would be living based on what I wanted, mm-hmm. based on sight. So he just says, here's my word. Here's what I'm telling you. But there's some other person. There's somebody that's, no, this is what you ought to do. So it's really a battle of words that I just have to figure out what I'm going to trust. And that book goes through that process. I'm going to have to trust something. What is it going to be? I'm not big enough. I do not have a big enough brain. I've not been alive long enough to understand everything. I got to trust it.
I think even something that you mentioned this morning is really pertinent. The phrase that you used is the essence of goodness, or the essence of good is the nearness of God. Mm-hmm. And we are so often distracted by the things that we think are good mm-hmm. about this earthly life. We can't even imagine as a celestial goodness that's different from where we are right now.
Yeah.
And as we draw nearer to God, that's why we see strong believers at the end of their life. Boy, they're ready.
Yeah.
They're ready because they've seen the futility of what's here, and they long for something that's different. And it's just so hard for younger people to see life through that lens.
Yeah, and he says in that passage that God is my portion forever. I mean, you're just thinking about food. You're thinking about going through the buffet line, and there's my portion, and that's enough to take me to the next meal. I mean, I always finish saying, oh, that's so much. I won't need to eat for a week. Never works.
No.
4 hours later, I need to eat more food. But that verse says that God is my portion forever. I mean, that illustration is a crazy deal. So let me tell you what my mission is.
That's what I was going to ask you. What did you end up coming up with then?
We've talked about
That's a lot of intro there. So my mission is to glorify God by communicating to others the character of my God, whom I'm continually seeking to learn more about. I would like to be consistent, orderly, reverent, and enthusiastic as I endeavor to accomplish this goal. Now, for me, there's a couple of things going on. When I read other people's mission statements, and we go through that thing and they write it up, usually they're just, to glorify God, that's what I'm all about.
Right.
But they just read a mission statement that is what everybody's could be. So I think a good mission statement is I'm able to read it and I'm able to see you in that mission statement. Like I'm able to say, oh yeah, I can see that would be your mission statement. So for me, to glorify God by communicating to others the character of my God, two things there, communicating and then the character of my God. Those are things that you've been out to Ironwood. You've seen, the signs that are out there, all the stuff that's posted. Mm-hmm. The biography of God is a devotional that I've worked on. Those things all come out of, I want to communicate the character of my God. So I find like today here, I'm at Maranatha and I'm sharing with the students, what an opportunity to communicate.
Right.
So this isn't like secondary work. This isn't extra. This isn't me being pulled away from my normal job. This is my life. Like I'm here at Maranatha being able to do what is my mission. And that's what makes you give 100%. It's easy to go somewhere else and just kind of coast through. Like, I don't know what they've got going on over there, but my work, boy, that's the real work. But no, it's God's work, and so I get to do my mission there. So to glorify God by communicating to others the character of my God, and then I've got to understand what that relationship is, whom I'm continually learning to seek, or seeking to learn more about. Then what I did was I added just 4 words that kind of described how I would do that. So the consistent, orderly, reverent, enthusiastic. And
how'd you come up with those 4?
In those 4, there's an exercise in that book that brings you to 7 words that would be kind of like the billboard of your life. And that process of writing that down, narrowing it down, it made me kind of realize this is what I value. This is what I like. So the whole consistent, orderly is the organized part. Reverent, I just really felt like God was not set where he belonged. Like we would talk about God in a way that didn't recognize how big he really was. And enthusiastic, I just want to there should be some emotion involved.
But do these 4 words, did you choose them because they characterized you, or because you wanted them to characterize you? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you choose those aspects? Because there's a lot of aspects of God that you could put on a list, but you chose these 4 things. Is it because you spoke to them, or you wanted them?
I think this depends. So when I did this, 28, 29 years old, it was both I wanted it and you could see that it was somewhat in my life. I think if you're doing this early on where you're just figuring this out, it's probably what you want it to be, and you may change it. But I believe if you're doing this at 40, 50, you're able to look back and say, no, this is who I am. This is the way God made me. And in God's work, I am a crescent wrench, or in God's work, I'm a pneumatic nail gun. Whatever. You kind of understand how God made you. And
I think there has to be something that's really aspirational about a mission. Like if you're not stretching, what do you like? There's nothing like energizing about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you don't have something to work towards, is it a goal or is it a present reality?
Yeah.
Well, when you put something like consistent on there,
you
don't ever achieve that until you're not breathing anymore.
Yeah, and that's why the last words there, endeavoring, there's an endeavor to accomplish this goal. Mm-hmm. So I don't think this is an arrival point. This isn't I did it, I get to mark it off the list. This is something you're constantly working at attaining to.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
We hear, I think it's more popular these days to talk about, let go, let God, sit back and be a spectator, what God can do, let God do the work. It's not a human thing. I agree with the sentiments of all that. I don't agree with where a lot of that stuff is taking people. But you're talking about endeavoring. You're talking about, I've got to work. I've got to focus. I've got, and there's a lot of I've got to, in that element. So how do you balance your effort with an acknowledgement that this is still God's work?
Yeah, I think I know what God is capable of. The reverence that I have for an almighty God who can do anything that he chooses is just mind-blowing, staggering to know that he can do whatever. But I think as I look through Scripture, he is constantly in the process of saying, I want you to take this next step. And that next step may be hard, may not make sense. So think Israelites on the shore of the river there, and they're like, oh, we're gonna die here, it's over. But they've got to do something. Like that step of what they do. What I'm amazed at is that in the process of working for God, and I'm like, boy, I think this would make God happy. I think he would like this, and we take a step. All of a sudden you see God do all these things that you're like, oh, did you see what God just did? This is so cool. And then those steps become a little easier, but he constantly puts you in this spot where you've got to take a step.
So in deciding those steps, you're in ministry leadership now. You haven't always been. You've been behind the scenes, really, really behind the scenes for a while, it looked like in your bio, cleaning toilets and making snow cones, evidently.
Yeah.
Which, there's nothing worse than a skimpy snow cone.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah.
Just ice. You're just chewing ice.
Skimping on the juice.
And how much does that juice cost?
Right. So you've been behind the scenes. You've been in leadership. How do you decide what that next step should be? Let's take a step back from our own life choices for a second. You guys have some incredible projects that you've accomplished at camp. Things that people would have said, humanly speaking, that's impossible. So I get the sense that you're not just talking about doing realistic things. You're not just saying, well, I'll take the next marginal next step. You've done some pretty audacious endeavors. I'm sure not every one of them has been successful in what you had hoped, but what is your process for that? Because you're obviously balancing between not presuming on God, but being courageous and daring in throwing it out there that I think we're going to try and do this.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of that, or how would you approach that?
Well, let's take a look at what the last two projects we just went through, and I'm good with the dream big. We have a big God; He can do what he chooses, and He can do it fast. He's an amazing God, and He wants His. He wants the harvest to take place, so He's going to invest in the harvest. So in this process, for me, we had a big thing we were wanting to do at camp. It was probably about a $2-3 million project. We shared it with a number of folks. We did the work to do the planning, to get it going. It just nothing happened, And it totally made sense to me that this is the next step, but nothing took place on His end. And I remember sitting there saying, we've been talking about this for a year and nothing has happened. This might be my idea and not God's idea. When you come to that realization, this might not be where God's headed, it kind of brings you back. And instead of just pressing through it and saying, oh, well, we're going to borrow that money, we're going to make this happen, it totally makes sense. It goes back to that little humble statement. You're like, I might not have this one right, and I don't know. It's not like I chose that because it was the second choice. It was the first choice. It was the good choice. Everything, but you just step back and say, I don't know what God's doing. Like there becomes this vulnerability that here I'm their leader, and I don't know. I know we're not doing this. Like, God hasn't done anything.
But that sure does feel like failure.
It does, and it feels like you're not leading very well. You're not doing anything. So I remember we went through, COVID. We went through all that stuff. And this last year in our ministry, biggest year we've ever had.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm kind of sitting there saying, I think this is a third camp. I think we need to build a whole nother river town. And I remember penciling it out and saying to Dad, I said, this is going to be $5-6 million. And he's like,
Plus the staff to run
you got to add staff, you got to add homes, you got to add all this stuff. And we're like, I don't know. I said, yeah, but we're turning away people left and right. And I think that God, this might be the way. Let's at least explore it. And so we put the little plan together, did the work to do that, presented it to a few people. And all of a sudden, in the last 3 or 4 months, we went from about $20,000 in the bank and now pledged and more than we can possibly handle. And we're kind of sitting there like, oh man, no difference in what we did, but you have one that failed, one that's about twice as big, and God's already provided, a big portion of it. And you just step back and you're like, okay, it was my job to at least make some decisions about where we were headed, but I need to hang on to that loosely, lightly. Like, I don't know what God's going to do. And so if he decides that's where we're headed, and I believe that God puts us in places, we see all through Scripture, he puts you in a place that when he provides, it's obvious he did it.
Right.
Like Elijah. So when he gets water from the creek, that doesn't seem like any big deal. That's where you get water. Right. But when the ravens show up, bringing food to him and dropping it off, he's got to look at that like, whoa, God did that. Mm-hmm.
And God did provide the water in the brook.
He did.
But it wasn't.
It's easy to explain.
Yeah, we explain that away with natural causes.
So sometimes our little fundraising letter or, the offering, whatever it is, we think, oh, yeah, God provided. But I think that God wants to provide in ways that are the normal, like what you'd expect, but also are the things that you're just like, that is quite a story.
I read a quote once about somebody who commented just looking at evangelical Christianity in the United States. And he said the problem with most Christians is they've never witnessed anything supernatural.
Yeah.
They've never seen anything that couldn't be explained by natural processes and occurrences.
Yeah. And to sit on the front row to see what God does, that is fun. To be in the arena where God is working, that is amazing. Because I don't think it's an entertainment sport, living the Christian life. I think it's a participation event.
Jonathan, do you hear in what he's talking about the positioning? God's doing something. Right. I'm looking for what God is doing and trying to position my ministry and myself in the middle of that highway.
Right. It's what we've said before.
Not how can I get God to come and help do what I want.
It's what we've said, even with the ministry opportunities that we have for our students and stuff. Go and find where God is working and get involved there. Because there are things that we know for sure God is going to do. And if you attach yourself to those ministries and those ministry efforts, you're not doing the work. God's still doing the work. He just promised that he's going to do that.
Yeah, the best way I can illustrate this is, I like to hunt and I like to, do things like that. So when my son is born, I'm pretty excited because that means I get to get him a gun, And so at the age of 2 years old, I am not going to give him a shotgun.
No.
That would be dangerous.
Yes.
But at which point that he has learned and grown, and then you'd be like, okay, here's a weapon, and that's kind of a fun thing. I give that to him. So I think sometimes God says no because we're not ready for it. We have not grown. So when we try to do things that might be big and and then God doesn't provide, we just step back and say, okay, we've got to grow our people, we've got to grow our processes, and that's what we're wanting for. Your son, who's going to have a gun, he's got to be big enough, and he's got to understand all the safety rules, and then you're ready to give it to him. So we have a Heavenly Father who created the planet, okay? And so what is the big deal to have a church building? What is the big deal to have things that would help, what would make him happy? But he's not going to give me something that's going to hurt me. So if I gave my 2-year-old a gun, that's not a good situation. He's not ready for that.
Yeah.
So I need to now grow in my knowledge of God, grow in my processes, grow in all those little things. And if God trusts me with more, then great. If he doesn't, honestly, at this point, I'd be happy. God, no more money. There's plenty on my plate. But God is not in the business of coasting.
There have been so many things over the years that we thought would be the next thing to add. And in ministry leadership, sometimes you get the tendency to always think that the job is to grow and to do more, and that usually means building or adding, something new. And I mean, there's a sense in which if you can reach more people, it's a good thing, but that's not always God's agenda. And now you look back after being in leadership for a while, and you realize all the things God sort of said not now to, maybe no, maybe not now, and you say, boy, I'm so glad now that I see where we've been through and what was lying ahead that he knew was there that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we didn't go down that road. We'd have been sunk for sure when the trouble came.
I tell my team all the time, I said, okay, guys, I'm just going to tell you something about me. My foresight is 50-50. My hindsight is 20-20. But you just got to know, I do not know the future. So I know I'm leading you, but I'm leading you in a way that God hasn't laid everything out. So that whole foresight is 50-50. We might be going the right direction, but God may take us another one. I'm okay with that. It kind of is now an adventure. And just like you were saying, when you look back, you're like, oh, look how God led. Oh, that was a perfect plan. And so that hindsight is really fun to see how he works. And I think gives us the, okay, I can trust him with a foresight that I don't totally know, because the hindsight is so good. Yeah.
And that's a process of reflection and thanksgiving that the Bible talks about all the time. Is that but that takes some time, and there's some discipline to that. You ought to take time to reflect on, no matter where you're at in life, what's God done for you in the past? How did that work out? How did he speak to you? How did he lead you? And then borrow that into the future.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we know of our God.
So you said something about growing the people and growing the processes.
Yep.
So that's interesting. There's people, and there's process people, but we really need both.
Them all, yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to the interplay between people and process. That these things are not mutually exclusive, because I've certainly heard, well, you're just all about those processes and I'm just all about people, which is to say, I don't want to be a part of the program, And then at the other side, where people are just cut and dry about processes, no matter how it bowls people over. And how would you describe the interplay of those?
You're going to have to begin with your philosophy right there at the beginning. So out of that then comes your people and processes. Your processes are trying to make the philosophy. It's trying to flesh out how you're wanting to do it, the way that philosophy is going to be achieved. What happens with really good processes is it exposes bad people. Okay. So if you have bad processes, bad people hide in that really well. They're able to live in that environment of, there's not very good processes. So the best thing that I can do for our ministry is understand that this is our philosophy. And because of that, then these are, mission, philosophy comes out of that mission. Now these are the processes that are going to accomplish that philosophy of ministry. Now those processes now reveal the people who actually want to accomplish that philosophy, because it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, that's what I believe it, and then not actually do the work of the processes. The processes are a part of your ministry. Nobody enjoys it. It's policy manuals. It's the way we do things. It's like the worst ever, but it's free. You normally have to invest a little bit in processes, and you're never done with it, but you're always growing in it. And I think that the growth points, so in our ministry, any group that you're going to go in, let's just take church ministry, 40 to 80 to 120 to 240 to 500. Every one of those group dynamics requires a different process thing. So sometimes we want to grow, but we don't want to do the process work that goes with that growth. So I think when God sees that process work is in place, that you could actually handle this, then giving you more ministry capacity is what he will do.
And the processes are not anti-people. In fact, the processes are what help us to care properly with a consistency for more people.
The processes become the tools that people use. So the people part of it, the growing people, this is your multiplier. So your people are if you can grow your people, now that's where you really grow. But those people need good processes. It's because we have long longevity, 20 people in the ministry, 20 years or more. And so we've gone from what is a small ministry, and now, we're serving 3 groups at the same time, and, multiple things happening. And they have a tendency to go back. Remember back when, I remember that process, but that process was also at that size.
A simpler time,
yeah,
a different
a
day
different
and age.
time. And we have to be willing to change the process. That person has to grow into that process in order to say, okay, I understand. So the discussion becomes, is this process hurting philosophy or not? Like, you can definitely get processes that you thought were a good idea that when you get in the midst of them, you're like, ooh, that's the little side things that are happening. The side effects of that process are not what I had anticipated, because you're living in a new realm. You've not tried to grow to this point, but you've got to have people that are willing to change. If you have a person not willing to change, they get to stay at your ministry for about a year, and in a year your ministry has changed. There's just no way to get around it.
Dr. Gibbs used to say, the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you don't make the turn.
Yeah.
And so then
That's a good one.
you're out in the field. All right.
You'll enjoy tonight. We're going to do Gears of Teamwork.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just a picture of what the team is. That helps me understand how people interact in that whole mix. So for me, the biggest thing I can do as a leader of an organization is grow my people. And I got to do that 10 minutes a day, every day.
We want to be people-oriented. Every individual soul is the only eternal thing that we're interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, all the material world is temporal. And so because that soul is the only thing that's eternal, it's the most valuable thing. So we're not slaves to our processes for the sake of that and overriding the eternal. But at the same time, we will not maximize our impact on people unless we have a culture of and values that are consistently, put into the field.
Yep.
In your case, week after week. In our case, semester after semester. And you cannot scale to a level of complexity where you have many different moving parts or gears within that machine unless you have dependable, repeatable, bought into, processes that guide and govern that. And that help us to have a confidence that if I do my part, I know they'll do their part, and this will work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And identifying those gears that are missing a few cogs, that's part of my job, on a daily basis. And leadership is trying to get all those pieces in the right place. And just when you get them all right there, God calls somebody to leave.
Oh, yeah, and it totally messes with it.
No!
So, like, for me, when I'm looking at it, everybody will look at the property, and they're like, oh, man, you guys have a lot of property, and there's all this stuff, and it almost seems easy. And I kind of sit there, and I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, the property part is almost the easiest part. The growing people, growing processes, teaching the philosophy, making sure that people get that, communicating it, that's the hard part. And it seems like when you do all of that work, that the rest of it just kind of almost flows. And I don't want to simplify it, but we have a little statement at camp: money is easy for God. So if he didn't give you money, wonder why that is. Because money's easy for God. It doesn't have a will. He could dump money on you anytime he chooses. Like oil well underneath your property, you're all set to go.
But I always say God is not experiencing a resource crunch. He's got unlimited resources. He gives us what he wills, and if he hasn't given it to us, it's for a reason. It's for our good, his glory. And like I start every financial committee meeting with a reminder of one sort or another that usually boils down to, okay, guys, here's the mission for this year. Here's the amount of resource we have to accomplish it. Now, how are we going to get this done?
Yeah.
And there's never enough money, like you mentioned earlier in the assembly. We all think that with more money we could do more. But this is what God's chosen us. So we're stewards. We got to be faithful with this, and it means saying no to an awful lot of stuff. I mean, you started this out, and I was thinking not only about myself personally, but about all the different ideas that people have of things that we could do that we're not going to have time to do or money to do.
And the crazy part of that little thing we read here at the beginning was that I read this probably once a year. And when I read it, I'm like, oh, man. You know what I mean? Something hits me again, like, I need to adjust again. So
absolutely.
That's cool.
This has been a phenomenal conversation. This is exactly what this podcast is intended for. Thank you for your faithfulness in showing how to live out a mission and for your experience here on campus with the
God
students.
is good.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. On Mission is a production of Maranatha Baptist University. Subscribe to On Mission on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, as this will help other growing leaders find these conversations. For information about our guests, previous episodes, and general information about On Mission or MBU, go to mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.